Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Michael Keith. I know many people in this room, and it's great to see a large number of friends, colleagues, and people whose work I've known and respected for a very long period of time. Welcome to this workshop conference that links to the Economic and Social Research Council's programme, Urban Transformations. I'm not going to say very much, but just to explain a little bit about the background to the event for the next 3 days, and next 2 days and tonight, and some of the logistics of the setup. The conference is actually titled Urban Transformations, Comparison and Value, and there is a sense to that. In terms of just some of the logistics, though, before I get onto that, the event is live streamed, so you might want to know that. There is also a hashtag, the Good City at UT Connect, which we are kind of looking for people to hopefully engage with. And we are also here for tonight and 2 further days. The next 2 days are in a different location, and that which was at St Anne's, isn't it? Yes, just so I don't get that wrong. St Anne's College? Anthony's College, sorry. Don't go to St Anne's College. At St Anthony's College. The purpose of today's event is really to introduce some of the ideas that we're talking about over the next couple of days, but from a very practical perspective. We're very pleased to have somebody who has had a very rich experience with city government across the world, Mr. Parks Tao, and I'll be saying a little bit about Parks today. We're incredibly grateful that he's flown from South Africa explicitly for this event, and we look forward to his contributions in just a second. The reason we thought Parks was such a fantastic speaker to kind of open up this small event is that, in a sense, he brings together some of the themes that link the programme itself, the Economic and Social Research Council programme. The Urban Transformations programme actually was set up by the British Social Science Research Council about 4 years ago. There was an intention at that time to try and create an initiative around urban studies that was seen to be important for the Research Council, and so they commissioned 5 expert papers from eminent scholars that looked at issues of development, issues of economics and finance, issues of governance, issues of informatics, and issues of urban resilience. What was quite striking, those papers are available from 3-4 years ago, was when you looked at those 4 papers one alongside another and you compared their bibliographies. The bibliographies are almost completely mutually exclusive. They had very little reference one to another. I was asked at the end of 2015 to think about what it might mean to bring these very diffuse takes on the city together in a programme. And I suppose we started with that sense of, if you like, a complete notion of Babel. And Babel in the sense that the mathematicians, the economists, the anthropologists, the historians, the development specialists were almost kind of talking about something very different on each occasion. So over a period of time, for the Research Council, what I tried to do was to put together a logic that actually might facilitate people from very different backgrounds to come together. And I'm very pleased that part of the end of that process is bringing together a number of those projects over the next couple of days, along with some guests and other interesting people that we wanted to kind of engage with some of the projects themselves. There was, in a sense, if you like, both a diversity of disciplinary takes on the way in which people were thinking about the city, but also a diversity of approaches about the ways in which academic life might make the city visible as an object of study. In a sense, that kind of diversity was mapped onto an extraordinary diversity that we recognise in urban professions, the architects, the planners, the chartered surveyors, particularly prominent in the United Kingdom through their institutional formation, that sit in silos that also don't necessarily talk to each other particularly well. There was a sense in which that kind of Babel-like situation was one which might, on the one hand, kind of try and produce a program that was either very directed towards one element of those kind of early papers that were put together, or alternatively actually try and think through the urban slightly differently. The way we actually put together a series of calls, and colleagues from the ESRC who are here, Tim Pank, but others, Julie McLaren and a number of other colleagues from the ESRC, were extremely helpful in trying to suggest that we might be able to pull together various different pots of money. And so in the end, the logic of that programme over the last 2 or 3 years has been structured in a way which is straightforwardly geographical. There is a United Kingdom leg and a series of projects that particularly came out of a call in the UK. There was an alliance that was set up in Brussels and a link to the European funding programmes that produce a number of projects that link into the Urban Transformations Network that way. And then there were a series of projects that were tied into funding that linked up Brazil, China, India, and South Africa in different ways. The logic that I actually tried to suggest to the Research Council was that what one might do actually is not try and in some way produce a grand synthesis of these different approaches to the city, but actually try and think about the sorts of priorities that we might consider that actually might work across the professional urban interests, the different spokespeople for the city, that would actually recognise the importance of geographical scale and historical time, thinking about historically deep trends, but also small neighbourhood studies alongside kind of major international comparisons, but also had some sense of future orientation. And a number of the calls that then produced the projects that are in this room partly came out of a series of initiatives that hopefully began to reflect that sort of structure. What I hope it means is that there is a sort of logic to the people we're bringing together that is not disciplinary, but it is most straightforwardly addressing some of the most challenging ways in which we think about the city of the future. You'll see that the conference itself is actually structured, or the workshops are structured by a juxtaposition of, on the one hand, what we've talked about as themes for comparison, particular ideas around which we might organise the comparative. But then secondly, a notion of structuring of value. There's a sense in which that if we accept that Babel-like starting point of the ways in which different professions speak to each other, we might almost go back to the ways in which academics have territorialised the city. David Stark talks about what he called the Parsons Pact, that when, in a sense, Talcott Parsons had a claim that at one stage he was meant to say, you economists study value, while we sociologists study values. That sort of sense of an easy division of labour, I think, is obviously anachronistic. There is a very serious way in which the kind of different registers of value that work through different disciplinary traditions might create different kinds of cities, and how we think about making commensurable those measures of value in architecture, measures of value in economics, measures of value in various forms of planning, create different registers of value and worth. And there are literatures that think through how values and worth might play out in a form juxtaposed one against each other that might make us think about the practical realisation of those different values in City Hall, in the delivery of city governance, but also in the everyday lives of the folks who inhabit some of the cities of the globe that are the focus of the researchers that are in this room. It's in that spirit that what we thought it would be really helpful to do would be to kind of kick off with somebody who has very rich experience in practical governing, linking, politicking in the city. And so we invited Parks to come today, and I'm very pleased to introduce Parks. And he is going to speak to us for 45 minutes today. Parks Tau is somebody of extraordinary contribution to the life of urban governance. He is currently the president of the United Cities and Local Government, UCLG, the global network of local governance. He was previously, as people in the room will be well aware, was mayor of Johannesburg, the second post-apartheid mayor of Johannesburg, and was involved in some of the most challenging politics of contemporary South Africa in a period of time between 2011 and 2016. And he has also carried on as a senior representative in various kind of high-level arenas, particularly associated with the United Nations. So we're very privileged to have Parks here today. So he'll speak to us for 45 minutes, and then there'll be a chance for questions and discussions afterwards. But Parks, thank you very much for coming, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Michael. You emphasized 45 minutes a few times, which suggests that I should discipline myself, because I always run the risk, if I do not always stick to the text, of speaking for much longer than I was asked to. But thank you very much for inviting me to participate in these conversations, and I'm looking forward to the conversations that will take place over the next few days. To be able to share some of, as you said, our experiences in particular in the city of Johannesburg, but also reflect on some of the critical issues that I think all of us here, and indeed the local government fraternity and government overall, is processing with regards to what we need to do to address what sometimes might seem as intractable challenges that confront our cities. I should say that I'm humbled by the honor of giving the keynote speech at Compass, which not only conducts valuable high-quality research, but facilitates platforms for seminal knowledge exchange across academic disciplines, methodological frameworks, and ideological orientations. As a long-standing policy practitioner, I treasure this opportunity to share my thoughts and experiences at this August conference convened under the Catholic theme, The Good City, Urban Transformation, Comparisons and Value. In the process of preparing my address today, I came across an interesting article published recently in the Guardian newspaper, and this article, written by journalist John Vidal, had a rather powerful and existential heading entitled, "The 100 Million City. Is 21st Century Urbanization Out of Control?" What I found very interesting about this article was Vidal's thesis that projections suggest cities will swell at an astonishing pace, but whether that means our salvation or an eco-disaster is by no means certain. And so this gathering is timely and indeed opportune to all of us, coming from our respective geographic backgrounds and concerned, as I'm sure we all are, with modalities of a proverbial good city. I've titled my address Towards an Inclusive Urbanism, and hope to focus on three interrelated areas. Firstly, offer critical reflections on the work we initiated during my tenure as an executive council and also executive mayor of the city of Johannesburg. Secondly, to give some background to the work that our government in South Africa is doing in implementing and inclusive urbanism through some of our blueprint programs. And thirdly, reflect briefly on some of the work we are undertaking at UCLG in integrated urban transformation and promotion of the new urban agenda in Habitat 3. Ladies and gentlemen, when I assumed mayorship of the city of Johannesburg in 2011 to 2016, in a city of almost 5 million people, my mandate was primarily guided by our country's constitutional injunction to create a developmental local government. Linked to this, my mandate was informed by our moral obligation to advance a culture of human rights and extension of greater equity in the provision of basic public amenities and services to residents living in one of Africa's most preeminent cities. Of course, this legal injunction and moral duty would be implemented to both current inhabitants and the new entrants into a city experiencing phenomenal levels of urbanization. For us in the local government sphere, these obligations and commitments were crucial since their principal objective was largely to undo and deconstruct painful past mistakes whilst also planning for a better future. Needless to say, this inherited and painful past, which continues to shape our present realities, includes redressing the damage inflicted by precedent-setting legislation like the 1913 Land Act, the 1923 Native Urban Areas Act, and the 1957 Group Areas Act, which were the fundamental pieces of legislation that defined apartheid South Africa, access to land, and access to the urban amenity, if I may say so. It meant giving effect to flagship programs targeted at transitioning from apartheid spatial frameworks based on exclusion towards democratic governance based on inclusion. In this manner, the collective belief was that we would be moving in a direction of integrated transformation that recognizes the human rights of all citizens and communities, irrespective of race, creed, geography, or ideological orientation. For us in the city, the model of advancing this vision included wide-ranging consultations through workshops and charrettes in order to secure policy coalitions. Subsequent results emanating from these public engagements led to the Johannesburg Growth and Development Strategy 2040, the GDS, with the Spatial Development Framework, or in short SDF 2040, serving as the land use and capital investment toolkit to achieve our set vision. These were our efforts to answer the question in Vital's article on how to confront what sometimes might seem an intractable set of challenges characterized, amongst others, by high levels of urbanization, low economic growth, resource constraints, and urban sprawl. This possibly is best captured by the underlying principles encapsulated in our growth and development strategy, which are the following. 1, eradicating poverty. Secondly, building a growing and inclusive economy. 3, building sustainable human settlements. 4, ensuring resource security and environmental sustainability. 5, achieving social inclusion through support and enablement. And lastly, promoting good governance. The Growth and Development Strategy and the Spatial Development Framework could in essence be characterized as compacts or covenants we signed with our residents to fashion an economic democracy, which firstly removes barriers of entry, particularly to the poor, secondly deconcentrates economic activity and value chains in an equitable mode, and thirdly seeks to empower disadvantaged communities through skills training and ensuring that we develop formal and informal learning mechanisms linked to the mainstream economy and building an inclusive city. Why were these two overriding strategies, which were open for further refinement, pursued, and what international resonance did they elicit? As stated earlier, the spatial framework was to become one of the mechanisms through which we would then translate the vision and principles of the GDS into implementation. As the former executive director of UN Habitat, Dr. Johan Kloos, said at the launch of the SDF, the spatial framework in 2016, and I quote, "The SDF 2040 opens the path towards a new model of sustainable urbanization, a compact city with high population densities around infrastructure nodes." In fact, Dr. Kloos continued by stating that the SDF sets the example of what planning an African city in the 21st century can be and how the new urban agenda can be implemented in the future. But for us, an inclusive urbanism extended beyond bricks and mortar, or wires and pipes, or even tracks and roads. Rather, it would be about ensuring that the urban system creates greater equity and justice, in particular to those historically disadvantaged and the most vulnerable in our society and in our city. Some of the core flagship programs we initiated included the following: the Corridors of Freedom, Josie at Work, and Josie being one of Johannesburg's by names. It goes by Josie, Joburg, and a whole range of other names. But Josie at Work, the green and blue economy, and also building a smart city. Program Director, with your permission, allow me to briefly explain what these programs entailed. With regards to spatial inclusion and the Corridors of Freedom in particular, one of the flagship programs of our spatial framework we initiated was titled the Corridors of Freedom. As you may know, like most apartheid cities, Johannesburg is a city of stark contrast, divided between islands of some of the highest standards of living, coupled with oceans of record high poverty and inequality. In fact, the South African city on average is considered to be the most unequal city, measured through the Gini coefficient. Whilst these divisions may seem insurmountable, however, I remain motivated that these manufactured superficial divisions offer another truth, and that is that in the main, Johannesburg has untapped great potential and opportunities. And so in order to address this inherited inequality that is embedded in space and geography, we came up with what we call the Corridors of Freedom. Appropriately so, as these sought to integrate through a transport system a city that historically was designed for exclusion, and through these connect citizens and communities together, linking them to nearby nodes so that they could access basic amenities and jobs close to where they reside. The corridors we had identified anchored around mass transit systems were also defined as the centers for incentive urban growth, where we would significantly increase densities and increase the intensity of land use. Through this, we sought to create a more compact urban form. The corridors were also meant as a means to link the critical nodes in the city and reverse the monofunctional nature of the city's morphology. Quite obviously, in this democratization of physical and virtual space, this reduced our citizens' travel times and meaningfully cut down their costs. Moreover, lowering of infrastructure costs resulted in a sizable positive return on investment. The corridors of freedom were and are symbolized in praxis through the Rea Vaya bus rapid transit system, which is arguably the first of its kind in the African continent. Given our past racial history, this inclusive transportation system is noteworthy since it partners local government with the predominantly black local taxi industry, the minibus taxi industry, that by and large remained informal. Without a doubt, the Corridors of Freedom program is a model for a post-apartheid transport system and highlights what can be achieved in rebuilding the political economy of space in a 21st century city. Linked to spatial redesign, the city of Johannesburg sought to respond to both the challenges of the Fourth Industrial Revolution and unemployment, particularly the disproportionate levels of unemployment as it affects the youth. In this regard, we launched programs designed to promote democratic citizen participation in self-empowerment programs through, for example, the Jozi at Work program. The Jozi at Work program was designed to create an opportunity for citizens and communities to partner with the city of Johannesburg to deliver municipal services in their own neighborhoods. In addition, it was aimed at shifting the prevailing mindset of seeking employment instead of generating employment. That is, turning job seekers into job creators. By the end of our term of office in 2016, we could confidently report that we had empowered on average over 1,000 cooperatives and community-based enterprises to co-deliver municipal services. Of course, uppermost in our concerns was to focus on our youth by breaking down barriers for their participation in the mainstream economy. This we were able to achieve for a major segment of our population who needed access to opportunities, required basic work experience, and a chance to start their own new micro-enterprises. Given the fact that it is estimated that less than 15% of Johannesburg residents have a tertiary qualification, the abiding challenge we had to overcome was to encourage people to consider online qualifications so that eventually they could climb up the social ladder of mobility. Moreover, we had concluded a partnership with the University of Johannesburg and Microsoft to train 1 million residents, most of them young, in fact 800,000 of them young, on Microsoft Office basic skills. By and large, this was made possible through our network of massive open online varsities, wherein we transformed our libraries into free universities and vocational colleges, teaching what the job market needs and our country needs. We're also in advanced stages of negotiating with the New York Public Library, which has arguably one of the largest e-book resources on the planet. Our partnership with Wits University also allowed us to establish the acclaimed Simulogong Precinct project, which is aimed at carving space for digital startups in a city where 50% of the population do not have regular access to the internet. I should also state here that in fact, of that 50% that do not have access to the internet, more than 70% actually are, if I may say, digitally illiterate, save for basic access to the cellular phone. Even with the cellular phone, the levels of use of applications has proved to be quite limited. This partnership also gave birth to a space for hosting the only IBM research and development facility on the African continent. Friends and colleagues, we cannot talk about sustainable urban development without mentioning the blue economy in addition to the green economy. The Blue Economy Initiative we undertook in partnership with the Zero Emissions Research and Initiative ZERI, whose operational philosophy sought to evolve from a core business based on a core competence to a portfolio of businesses that generate multiple benefits for business, society, and puts nature back on its evolutionary and symbiotic path. In short, it refers to, among others, employing smart and available innovations to solve complex problems. Excuse me. In the city of Johannesburg, the blue economy was one pillar of our growth and development strategy because this alternative economy offers avenues for the exploration and realization of cutting-edge science that can sustainably address the triple challenges of unemployment, inequality, and poverty. In this pursuit, when we were running the city, we invested energy and resources into exploring economic opportunities in some 29 potential projects which were later presented to the national government. We made these major investments since we believed that if harnessed to their maximal potential, blue economy opportunities relying on, for example, recycling waste products can be turned into usable products to speed up service delivery and engender small-scale, medium enterprises. Some of the blue economy initiatives we launched partly deal with food insecurity affecting many of our people, including the Johannesburg Bread Program, using fruit trimmings to replace flour in, say, bread, which was a cheaper and healthy alternative. We established programs dealing with micro-mushroom farms, linking them to cooperatives, low-flush toilets, converting organic waste to bioenergy, and harvesting gas for fuel and energy. Ladies and gentlemen, which theoretical paradigm underlined in the title of my keynote address informed some of our decisions? Why is this rather utopian paradigm favored in a period where it looks like Thatcherite or Reaganite economic ideology is making a comeback debatably in France and even in the United States? It is not by coincidence I am delivering this keynote address at the T.S. Eliot Theatre. One of the things this Nobel laureate is renowned for is his counsel to endeavor to dream big. As he said, only those who will risk going far can possibly find out how far one can go. Ladies and gentlemen, these flagship programs mentioned above, namely the Corridors of Freedom, Josie at Work, and the Blue Economy, are targeted at inclusive urbanism centered on decentralization or localization of administration, finances, and operations. For us in South Africa, inclusive urbanism matters since it speaks to the following factors. First, inclusive urbanism acknowledges the centrality of cities and towns in shaping the fortunes of people and the supporting ecosystem. Second, inclusive urbanism underscores the centrality of cities in provision of fundamental human rights for all citizens, irrespective of class, race, creed, geography, or ideology. Third, inclusive urbanism is synonymous with green urbanism, which highlights the positive and negative effects of our carbon footprint on the supportive environment. I emphasize human rights in echo of the elemental right to the city argument elaborated upon by David Harvey when he says, and I quote, "The right to the city is not merely a right of access to what already exists, but a right to change it after our heart's desire, to remake ourselves by creating a qualitatively different kind of urban sociality," close quote. Hence, these fundamental human rights to the city of Johannesburg for us implied these 5 rights. 1, the right to developmental service delivery, whereby citizens hold us accountable and become active participants in the delivery of services. 2, the right to a spatially integrated and united city where in time, hopefully, we will eliminate the need for private motor vehicles and encourage cycling lanes and pedestrian walkways. Thirdly, the right to a livable city, where people have access to good quality of life, since, to quote Harvey once again, the question of what kind of city we want cannot be divorced from the question of what kind of people we want to be. And 4, the right to inclusive economic growth by creating economic opportunities. And 5, the right to remake ourselves based on the understanding that the citizens engage not only on the basis of their needs, but also on the basis of their capabilities in the mold of Amartya Sen's argument. Friends and colleagues, it is my reasonable estimation that these programs, viewed as a whole, gave practical and long-term effect to the localization of the new urban agenda, which we all agreed to in Quito, Ecuador. In line with the imperatives set out in the new urban agenda, South Africa's national urban policy is encapsulated in what is called the Integrated Urban Development Framework Vision, which calls for resource-efficient cities and towns that are economically inclusive and globally competitive. The IUDF is explicitly aligned to the Global Developmental Agenda, whereby cities are granted a greater role in driving economic growth, promoting social cohesion, and qualitatively effecting spatial transformation. Which 2 examples give expression to the new urban agenda's implementation in South Africa? I'd like to suggest that firstly, the decentralization of housing and human settlement functions is a key lever for the new urban agenda's implementation. This, followed by the principle of cooperative governance, provides a central tenet of how we engage and jointly solve problems. To this extent, our work at the high-level panel to assess and enhance the effectiveness of UN Habitat was underlined by the admission that cities and towns are indeed catalysts for shared economic growth, political stability, social inclusion, and sustainable development. The high-level panel was an important forum to give arguably greater representational voice at the United Nations for our constituencies in local government and civil society, and also in mainstreaming urbanization across the UN system. This mainstreaming is important since the complexity of our world sometimes defy our most elaborate plans and forecasts. In fact, one of the key messages that emerged from Habitat 3 and the new urban agenda acknowledged that a significant percentage of urbanization occurs spontaneously without urban planning and therefore misses the opportunity to contribute substantively to improve prosperity and development. Program Director, at the risk of being accused of being an outdated leftist, my belief in inclusive urbanism is, and I believe, adequately responsive to the direction of how the world is moving. That is a world demanding greater cooperation instead of protectionism, acknowledgement of complexity rather than one-dimensional thinking. Given that the rate of suburbanization looks set to challenge many of our old assumptions, acceptance of the incalculable role cities and local government fulfills will prove crucial, since it is in cities and towns where the rubber meets the road in terms of, say, service delivery. Furthermore, inclusive urbanism enables innovation, facilitates economic opportunities and growth. Given the pressure of time, I did not speak about the obvious gap between cities in the global north and those in the global south, where financial instruments differ and access to financing sources is stark. At the UCLG, this question has become essential in our discussions and in planning to deal with, for example, capacitating cities in the developing world to access the debt capital markets and grant funding. As we search for solutions to the challenges confronting our fast-growing cities and seeking to reap the rewards of the twin demographic dividends of urbanization and youth, we have to match these with developing fiscal and financing solutions, starting with local tax and revenue sources, coupled with grant funding and access to capital markets. With these few words, I look forward to engaging further with you on the idea and practice of a good city. Thank you very much.
I've kindly agreed to take some questions and discussion. I guess people are just seeing their thoughts for a moment. Maybe one of the things I could, thanking you for your contribution this evening, ask if you look back on your period as mayor, would there be anything you would do different? Anything you would do differently? Maybe other people might want to pick up.
Anything I would do differently, I think, is possibly enhancing the extent to which we build partnerships with communities. So whilst we acknowledge that in fact the residents and communities were an integral part of the strategy, the extent to which we were able to consolidate this into a coalition of partners that are part of the solution to the city, I think, is something that requires attention. Sometimes we have the debate, should we have done certain political things differently, because we emphasized a lot of the work that we did on long-term strategy, but that doesn't mean an election. So a lot of what we did was futuristic, it was about strategy, it was about trying to redefine how the city works in the more fundamental ways, but that doesn't always reach out to communities in terms of what is the here and now, which is what people want to talk about. Residents in a city sympathize with long-term visions, but they want to have the issues of the here and now resolved much more than they think about those long-term issues. And I think that we didn't reach the best balance.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions. You have one just here and one behind.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks very much. My question follows on from that, in a way, because for me what's really fascinating about what you say and about you as the person saying it is that if you think about your own political trajectory and the time period that it's taken place over, it's not only have you had to mediate as many mayors and every mayor does, that relationship between the city and the city political leadership and the citizenry, the populace, but you've also had to navigate a whole series of other tensions in coming to this kind of synthesis position, strategic position. We've got a bit of the green economy and the blue economy, and we've got the economic question. So it's all the kind of different narratives get knitted into that. And I wondered if you could reflect on which of the three things I'm going to talk about were the most difficult for you to navigate. Putting aside the question of relating to the electorate, was it more difficult to navigate the internal political party processes? Was it more difficult to navigate the tensions and the professional vanities of the architects versus the engineers and the different departments that they represented? Or as a mayor, was it more difficult to engage with other tiers of government? And I wondered if you could give us a feel for because the pressure is on you, in a sense, to hold those competing ideas. And I wondered if you could just reflect on it, having travelled that journey in such an important moment of transition.
I should ask if people introduce themselves as well. I guess on the first day, it's really great.
Hello everybody, I'm Sue Farnell from the University of Cape Town.
Thank you. Do you want to take that one and then come back with one after?
I think navigating the intergovernmental system is a lot more difficult. It's easier said than done. South Africa has designed a cooperative governance system that should, in essence, institutionalize an intergovernmental system that's relatively easy to navigate. But the reality is that getting into a long-term vision and collectively investing in that direction proved a lot more difficult. Because in that instance it was the same political party that you would engage with at local, provincial and national level. But reconciling what everybody does always proved difficult. And that doesn't mean the other issues were not equally complex, because sometimes you find that the administration is quite comfortable in doing the things that they do on a daily basis in their respective professions and do not want to introduce new paradigms to the work that they do. But I do think that if we are talking to you as a South African now, if we can resolve the intergovernmental system and collective focus to what needs to be done, as encapsulated in the Integrated Development Framework that says the local government's IDP should form the basis of everybody's investments, then in fact you could get much better results.
This time we'll come back to you from your UCLG hat on that.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Ingrid LaFleur. And I'm just curious about thinking about inclusivity. I'm wondering how can that be achieved? You spoke about various programs that are very interesting and policy, but thinking at a social, cultural level, I'm just wondering how do you deal with the complexities of things like racism that kind of create more of a divide and a barrier to basically achieving that inclusive goal?
I think it's something that we're going to have to confront into the medium term. It's not something that you are likely, particularly with our history in South Africa, you're likely to overcome. Let's talk about what it means in the South African context. the reality is that the concentration of wealth and opportunity is largely in white hands, and therefore the ability to buy yourself out of the system exists. So as we seek to build an inclusive city, you're finding the creation of a lot of enclaves. There are gated communities where people are creating their own amenities, literally, that exclude them from the rest of what the city involves. And I can quote a few where literally people might not have to leave the gated community to interact with what the urban amenity is and its challenges and opportunities. So the wealthy are able to buy themselves out of the rest of the challenges that you confront, and their contribution becomes a transactional relationship, which is I pay my taxes, I pay my dues, and I hold you accountable to the dues that I pay. But the rest of what happens in the city is not really my business. I've kind of bought myself out of it. And now it's moving into public services. So you're having microgrids in certain estates that now get communities off the grid. So when South Africans complain about we don't have access to adequate energy, a few years ago we had load shedding as a problem, we had to switch off electricity. There are now enclaves of communities that literally can continue living without access to the grid. And people have been able to buy themselves out of the system. It doesn't suggest that the emerging black, wealthy and middle class is not part of that sort of solution, but it's not resolving the inherent racial character of the problem that we have.
We've got other comments, so questions still.
Thank you for your lecture. I'm Nicola Headland and I'm in the Urban Transformations team here at Oxford. Since we have two city makers on the panel, I wonder if you could reflect a little bit. One of your questions, Parks, was how can inclusive urbanism survive the return to more right-wing global governments? But then later you talked about financial instruments at the subnational scale for investment and municipalities borrowing in the bond markets and things like that as a positive for urban governance. And I wonder the kind of paradox of those two things, that in terms of being able to achieve the kind of infrastructural improvements that you would want to achieve collectively, increasingly you expose municipalities to the sort of vicissitudes of the bond markets, and I know that that's been similar in developing East London where Michael's got experience of, so I wonder if you could offer us a magic wand to get out of that quandary.
If you look at the graph that evaluates access to capital for cities, I'm trying to remember who published it, but it kind of said that Johannesburg is the highest investor in infrastructure on the African continent per capita, but compared to its counterparts in the global north, is investing a pittance. Now, going back to Vidal's article, the reality is that in an environment of high levels of poverty and great urbanization, people are coming into cities and living in slums, and these are growing at a phenomenal rate. So unless you're able to resolve the financial problems that come with the ability to invest in infrastructure and therefore attract and facilitate economic growth, you could actually be spiraling downward. And I think that what you need to do is to find ways of almost arresting the reality of what lack of access to resources is creating as an inhibitor to addressing the challenges that our cities confront. How do you do that? I think we need to, in the first instance, encourage a change in national policies and attitudes to promote not just political and administrative decentralization, but also fiscal decentralization. Secondly, we need to accept that even if you do have fiscal decentralization, you will need additional resources that you might not be able to extract from these relatively poor cities. So you need increased access to global financing systems, including grants and transfers, so that you can be able to transfer technical capacity and resources to enable our cities to confront these challenges.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Andresa, also from Urban Transformations. And I was very interested when you mentioned that, responding to Michael Key's question, that one of the things you would like to have done a bit more perhaps would be the engagement with communities, and also mentioned in your presentation about participatory democracy. And my question is, how to engage with communities, and should the states really create a more institutional platform for these communities, and what is the role that communities and social movements have in being a thing on its own or in cooperating with the states?
In many ways, governments find themselves to be almost on the opposite side of what essentially social movements are pursuing. That is in terms of execution. In our context, ideologically, we should be much closer, but when you get into administration, it gets a lot more difficult. Sometimes they say it's part of the problem of being in government. You kind of get trapped in the administrative and governance systems that creates a social distance between government and community. And it's something that we need to resolve, because in fact there's a great asset and knowledge base in communities that governments should tap into, as opposed to seeing them only as people that protest because they have particular problems, or people that are only lobbying for a particular agenda. I think that we should find ways of almost seeing them as partners and leverage their capabilities and capacity to be able to move forward. And I suspect that it's possibly maybe suggesting that it's the magic wand we're looking for might be a bit extreme, but close to it. Because people invest in different ways in their own needs. Can you be able to ensure that those investments work in the collective common direction? People that live in slums, in the context of a Johannesburg, generally almost always have either bought a piece of land from somebody who doesn't own the land, so it means people have invested in where they live, or they pay rent to some, as we would call them, shack lots in South Africa. So it doesn't mean people are not investing in their future or in their current. It's a question of how to ensure that that investment is harnessed and enabled to help grow the city. For those of my colleagues here who are South African, I should say one of the biggest mistakes we made in post-apartheid South Africa, we're a 24-year-old country, is to create a high degree of dependency from the populace. So anything that comes from government, people almost expect it to be done for them. But when it's done by somebody else, you're prepared to pay. So government gives you a free house, but you're going to pay for a check. So there's a contradiction there. But that's a culture that we've created that I think we need to reverse, so that people understand that co-investing is part of co-creation and our development trajectory.
Thank you very much. We have been on from Glasgow University, and we were late because the train is starting to something. Firstly, and we missed at the beginning, but here a lot of interest is in related to how. You mentioned a lot about inclusive urbanism. I think that is a great idea. And for developing countries, we needed to talk about different communities to be equal, inclusive. And internationally, we're talking about South, North, and knowledge sharing to be inclusive as well. And you mentioned about cooperation. And I think one of the projects I'm leading now is the Global Challenge Research Fund project. It's aiming to build the research capacities in the UK and in the developing countries. One of our case study cities is Johannesburg. And so you mentioned that you are looking forward to work with us to create good cities, and I'm taking your offer and probably receiving the answer. And I got a quick question, and from what I know, Johannesburg is probably, you mentioned, the most divided cities, and you can see different communities and townships and different people in the city. When you talk about participation, how difficult do you to encourage the participation from different communities? And is it easier to get the people in the normal part of the city to participate in decision making, or is it easier to encourage the slum dwellers to participate? Yeah.
It depends on the subject. So, if you're talking on matters that are either about, a topical matter now is the property valuation role in Johannesburg. Most active citizens are in the developed parts of the city, and they are actively participating. If you're to convene a forum now, you get very good participation because the topic they're engaging with is relevant to them. Whereas in an informal settlement, if you're talking property tax, they don't even want to talk to you. After all, they don't pay property tax. If you're talking about building houses for them, then you're talking a different language. And it's possibly something we need to find different ways of resolving, because it means you need to say to people that we're all in this together. So depending on how much we're able to raise from taxes will inform how much we're able to invest, so everybody should be part of the same conversation. Maybe the mistake is also on the side of government that separates the conversations as opposed to making it one comprehensive conversation about everything that confronts the city. Certainly we would look forward to any partnership extending it to Johannesburg. We have a South African Cities Network in South Africa, and the other organizations that I'm involved with. We're more than keen to build more coalitions and partners to address the challenges that we deal with, but also the great opportunities there are.
Are there particular cities you've learned from outside Johannesburg?
I think you continue to learn from different cities. I should say that a lot of the Latin American experiences on matters of mobility, of inclusion, matters of an evolving fiscal framework are quite interesting. So ranging from Curitiba to Bogota, the mobility solutions are quite interesting. Porto Alegre in relation to consolidating local democracy is interesting. But there are also interesting cities in the global north. So dealing with different issues. So Barcelona is an interesting city looking at the right to the city right now. In fact, they've become our champions on the right to the city, because the reality is that there are new spatial dynamics emerging from developments such as Airbnb that are displacing people at a phenomenal rate, in particular poor people in those cities. And a city like Barcelona is beginning to confront some of those issues. And when I'm saying Barcelona, because we spend a bit of time on UCLG head office is there, so we spend a bit of time with them. But they are an interesting city to look at when you're thinking about inclusion.
I think the spirit of what we're hoping to engender over the next 2 or 3 days is a series of conversations, I guess, which are geographical and perspectival. We have, unless anyone would like to ask any final questions, we have some time to both enjoy, hopefully, a reception, which I think is largely inside, but you might wish to use the chance to explore a little bit. There is, I think, a reasonably plentiful supply of wine, which hopefully will facilitate some of those conversations. I would, just before we thank Parks again, you might want to have a look outside. This is the college that was of T.S. Eliot and Tolkien. It was also the college where Stuart Hall, a towering figure of cultural studies, came to study. So the paradoxes of these particular buildings, I guess, resonate through a number of themes that you were talking about. Not least that if you want to go down the city wall out of the garden, you will notice that in the middle of the city wall there is a gate where the lepers actually came for alms. So that sense of the walled and gated city is with us in different forms, I guess, now, but has its own roots. I think the talk you gave was incredibly deeply rooted in your experience, very much appreciated by the audience, so maybe if we could just, again, please join the conversations informally afterwards, but before we do so, over a glass of wine, everyone thank Parks Tower for the contribution.